by all of our allies, very much including the United States. When they are threatened, we are there.
Foreign Affairs Minister Chrystia Freeland saying Canada has America's back. Her comments Friday were Ottawa's first response to the escalating threats between Washington and Pyongyang. Minister Freeland says Canada is very involved in working with our international partners to solve the problem. And there have been high-level meetings with the North Koreans. She also shed light on what appears to be a slight opening of diplomatic channels between Canada and North Korea. Perhaps the biggest beneficiary of that so far is finally back on home soil today. Canadian pastor Hyeon Soo Lim came home yesterday after spending more than 2 years in a North Korean labor camp. His release was in part the work of top Trudeau National Security Advisor Danielle Jean. The Prime Minister dispatched him to Pyongyang to secure Lim's release. But Freeland revealed that Jean's conversations didn't stop at discussing Lim's fate. Certainly looking at Minister Freeland's global movements in the past week would put her in a position of global diplomat. She was in Manila, where she spoke with North Korea's Foreign Affairs Minister, and she was in Beijing. Is Canada taking an active role in the standoff? Should we be? It's time for another summer edition of Sunday Scrum. Joining me today, freelance columnist Susan Riley. Good morning, Susan.
Good morning, Carol.
And John Ibbotson of the Globe and Mail. Good morning, John.
Hello, Carol.
Both of you are joining me from Ottawa, as usual. Let me begin here. Chrystia Freeland saying the North Korea nuclear program is a grave threat to the security of the world. She's calling on North Korea to pay attention to the international community to drop its program. Presumably, that includes stopping the threats to its neighbors. John, first of all, to you, how do you see it?
Well, I hope that what is happening is that everyone who has any access to anyone right now is cashing in their chips. That is to say, if the Chinese are able to influence the North Korean regime, they are taking action to do so, behind the scenes as well as in public. Canada may have some ability to talk to the North Koreans. We certainly have seen a very effective performance by Minister Freeland and other members of the government in the last week, but also talking to the United States. In fact, if I had any of my druthers, it would be getting Ms. Freeland to talk to her counterpart in the U.S. and getting Mr. Trudeau to talk to President Trump and saying, look, you're half the blame for this. You're rattling your saber every bit as much as the North Koreans are rattling theirs. We are in a very difficult, tense international situation. I don't think it's an imminent danger of escalating, honestly, but it's a time when everyone should be talking to anyone to try to find out how we could possibly ease the tensions that are escalating. Okay,
Susan, do you agree that it's a very dangerous situation right now that needs to be kept from escalating? How do you view it?
I don't view it as at the end of the world, and I don't think it's the imminent end of the world. I think it's another episode in the ongoing Donald Trump reality TV series. I don't really think he's made a leap from his old profession to his new profession. So every week there's a new episode. Every week he cranks up the drama. Whether it's deliberate or force of habit, so be it. That being said, there's no doubt that the stakes are fairly serious here. The thing that surprised me about Minister Freeland's comments, although they were correct, I mean, as a member of NATO, and by virtue of history, of course, we're allied with the United States, but she didn't say anything even mildly about Mr. Trump's provocative behavior. It may be, as John suggests, that they're sending those messages privately. You certainly hope they do, but you know, her initial comments could almost be read as an endorsement of Mr. Trump's bellicose position.
How
well,
so?
Because she didn't take him to task for his fiery language. Yeah, may I say one?
No,
sorry.
Let me just, you know what, while on that point, Susan, forgive me for interrupting.
Sure.
But I think we have that clip. We're going to run it, but let's call it up now if we can on Chrystia Freeland, her response when she was asked about that.
We stand by our allies when they are threatened, very much including the United States. Having said that, I think that we need to seek ways to de-escalate the situation. We need to find ways to pressure and persuade North Korea that the path that it is on, which has now also been condemned by countries that have in the past perhaps been closer to North Korea, like China, this path can have no positive ending for North Korea.
Okay, so you think she should have been harder in that statement when she had the opportunity to condemn the United States rhetoric?
Yeah. Sorry, I think she should at least have mentioned that, that it takes two to tango. But John's right, probably. I hope he's right, that they're making those approaches to the United States privately.
Well, John Freeland revealed that Canadian officials met with North Korea at least twice over the past week. Clearly, they're working on something.
Well, I don't know that they are working on something. That's speculation at this point. I think what we need to point out is three things. First, yes, this is North Korea's fault. Minister Freeland is right. It's North Korea that is seeking to acquire intercontinental ballistic missiles with a nuclear tip on them, and that is getting dangerously close to meeting that test. And this is North Korea that is threatening to fire ballistic missiles offshore around the island of Guam, which would be a dangerous escalation of the situation. But yes, there is also blame to be had on the American side. Donald Trump just freelancing out of the blue, threatening what we assume is nuclear war against Korea if Korea doesn't stand down, which dangerously escalated the situation. So yes, Donald Trump has his measure of blame in this as well. But third, and maybe most important, nothing is happening. People who know more about this than I do, and by the way, that's a very large group of people, people who know more about this than I do are pointing out that if this really were serious, then the United States would be sending the 7th Fleet into Korea's offshore. There would be a massive transfer of material and personnel to Guam and to Japan and to South Korea as the United States mobilized for an attack on Korea. None of that is happening. And because none of that is happening, that suggests this is still mostly just a war of words. And as long as it stays a war of words, we'll be okay.
Well, John, it's the latest episode of the Trump reality TV show. So it exactly proves what I was, or supports what I was saying before. You know, whatever happened to the ban on transgendered soldiers, for example? So far, there's been no official directive from Trump's office following up on that threat. He plants these bombs, you should pardon the metaphor, and then he vanishes or changes the subject.
Okay, but let me play devil's advocate on this one. The world in general is in agreement that North Korea has not developed a small nuclear warhead that could fit in the tip of a ballistic missile and be carried all the way to the United States. However, the North Koreans have said publicly through state television that they plan to send 4 intermediate-range missiles over Hiroshima, Shimane, and Kochi, Japan, en route to Guam. The Japanese are thinking, what do we do about that? Wait till it happens or look for a preemptive strike. This could potentially play out by proxy. Guam, North Korea for China, Japan, which could ultimately morph to the U.S. and China. They are talking about upping their arsenal in Japan. So there is movement and there is a deep concern in the region.
That assumes a level of international craziness, though, that I don't think exists. I think the greater danger is an accident, a misadventure, with millions, thousands at least, of innocent people killed in the interim. I'm not sure that anybody's that nuts.
The question is it 1914 or 1962? In 1914, you had an erratic and irresponsible German emperor and equally irresponsible people in Vienna who ratcheted up the tension over an assassination in the Balkans to the point where before any of it we knew what was happening, we had launched into the First World War more or less by accident. In 1962, during another crisis, John F. Kennedy and Nikita Khrushchev made the decisions and had the conversations that they needed to have in order to prevent the Cuban Missile Crisis from turning into a Third World War. Is it 1962 or is it 1914?
And can I just say one more thing about Canada's role, Carol, which I think has always been useful and quiet, so quiet, in fact, that a lot of people probably aren't aware of what is happening behind the scenes. But I think it's very instructive and very typical that Canada sent a diplomat of whom none of us have ever heard, Daniel Jean, whereas America used to send the Henry Kissingers of this world, or the Rex Tillersons. They send big guns. Canada sends anonymous but quite skilled diplomats.
Okay, so, let me just very quickly, I'm going to add this to the mix, and this is from Foreign Affairs. Jonathan Kay wrote a piece for Foreign Affairs this week in which he says, through the United States behavior in an unintended way, Trump has done much to give Canada the elevated international stature as long craved. Do you agree with that? Do you think that stature can now be parlayed to get something done about North Korea, let's say, tone down the rhetoric at the very least? Yes or no, Susan?
Yes, definitely. Tone down the rhetoric is probably all we can hope for, but yes.
John?
We do have an elevated status in the world right now, temporarily, because Justin Trudeau is performing effectively in foreign affairs and Donald Trump is doing exactly the opposite. But let's not forget, I wrote about this in the Globe on Saturday, it's because of our foreign affairs policy that we are the only country in the Western Alliance that is not protected by a ballistic missile shield right now, because of the Paul Martin government made that decision a decade ago. We don't always perform effectively in foreign affairs.